Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Struska, and I'm the author of several books on the Garmin G1000, 3000, 5000, and Perspective, and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. Later in this episode, we'll be talking with Arturo Guerra, who survived a VFR into IMC crash in a Carbon Cub. Unfortunately, his son, who was also a pilot and was flying at the time, did not survive. Arturo hopes that by sharing his story, other pilots will learn from the accident and avoid making similar mistakes. And so that you don't miss next week's episode, using whatever app that you're using to listen to us now, take a moment and touch the subscribe or follow key in that app so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. Last week in episode 257, we talked with Dr. Victor Vogel about challenges pilots face as they get older and strategies we can use to stay proficient. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/257. And this is a listener-supported show, supported by people like you. So if you would think for a moment, what would it be worth to you if you learned one thing that could help improve your flying? And then sign up to become a member and support the show financially at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. This week in the news, an American Airlines worker died in a horrible accident on the ramp. FAA says pilots who tested with an Alaskan DPE will have to redo their check rides. And we'll tell you how kayaks were used to rescue a downed pilot. All this and more, and the news starts now. From paddleyourown.canoe.com, we normally talk about general aviation news, but we've had a couple airline stories that are just too important to ignore. So this first story is American Airlines ground worker reportedly killed in horrific accident after being sucked into jet engine. A baggage handler for a wholly owned subsidiary of American Airlines has been killed after reportedly being sucked into the jet engine of an Embraer E-175LR regional jet at Montgomery Regional Airport in Alabama on New Year's Eve day. In a short statement, the airport confirmed the ground crew worker was, quote, involved in a fatality. The airport operator was unable to immediately provide any further information about the cause of death. There have been several unverified reports that the ground worker was sucked into the engine of an aircraft at the airport. The aircraft in question is believed to be an Embraer E-175LR regional jet operated by Envoy Air, a subsidiary of American Airlines which operates flights under the American Eagle brand. The worker has been identified as working for Piedmont Air, which is another wholly owned subsidiary of American Airlines. The 4-year-old aircraft involved in the incident was due to operate as American Airlines Flight 3408 from Montgomery to Dallas at 3:46 p.m. on December 31st. The flight was canceled. Neither Envoy nor Piedmont immediately responded to requests for comment. And from FlyingMag.com, Southwest Airlines and pilots disagree over causes of flight cancellations. Southwest Airlines is apologizing to passengers for hassles associated with thousands of flight cancellations this past week. Southwest pilots blamed the airline's vastly outdated software and mismanagement of scheduling and staffing. Many of the resulting problems, the Southwest Airline Pilots Association said, could have been anticipated if executives had implemented remedies that pilots and employees have suggested for years. After several days in a row when as many as 70% of their flights have been canceled, the company did a hard reset and restarted operations again on Friday, December 30th. Scrutiny of Southwest operations have even reached the federal level, with the Department of Transportation looking into what many are calling a meltdown within the airline's network. Quote, USDOT is concerned by Southwest's unacceptable rate of cancellations and delays and reports of lack of prompt customer service. The department will examine whether cancellations were controllable and if Southwest is complying with its customer service plan, the agency tweeted. Pilot Union Vice President Michael Santoro said, quote, we are tired of apologizing for Southwest. He said last week's stormy weather was a catalyst for the airline's difficulties, but placed much of the blame on a vastly outdated software system for managing schedules. Unlike most airlines, which operate networks based on main airports called hubs and destination or spoke airports, Southwest uses a point-to-point model, which in theory offers more direct flights between cities instead of making connections through hubs. One potential problem with this arrangement is that crews can more easily wind up stranded without an aircraft unless scheduling is precise, the union said. Pilots also took to social media to share stories about the airline and how they feel it has changed, particularly as its focus has shifted, they say, from operations to finance and return on investment for shareholders. Longtime pilot Larry Lanero said a half-dozen small-scale meltdowns occurred during the mid to late 2010s. With each mini meltdown, leadership continued to ignore the pleas and warnings of the employees in the trenches. We were still operating with 1990s technology. We didn't have the tools we needed on the line to operate the sophisticated and large airline we had become, Lanero said. From AnchorageDailyNews.com, FAA tosses flight test by well-known bush pilot throwing some Alaska aviators into limbo. A new federal notice warns that scores of Alaska pilots will need to redo flight tests administered by a widely known longtime bush pilot to maintain a crucial safety rating. The FAA last week issued the notice that airplane pilots who took two specific types of check rides with examiner Don Lee between July 2018 and June 2022 will generally need to get re-inspected to keep those ratings and potentially, for some, their jobs. One pilot likened the situation to being an attorney who passed the bar exam 4 years ago only to have to test again in 2 weeks. Few details were available about the reason the FAA decided to issue the notice and what problem investigators found with Lee. The notice makes no reference to any specific safety problems involving any pilots or Lee. The timing of the notice, just as the holidays arrive, earned criticism from some in Alaska's aviation community, as did the decision to broadly publicize the decision before sending individual notifications to the pilots involved. This is kind of a gut punch for a lot of folks, I'm not going to lie, said Adam White, government and legislative affairs advocate for the Alaska Airmen's Association. White, who said the Airmen's Association has been in discussions with the FAA about the notice, said the issue was an examiner that basically wasn't doing a complete check ride. The check rides referenced in the federal notice involve those for pilots earning an instrument rating or flight instructor instrument rating. The new notice involves about 140 pilot check rides. The federal notice was dated December 10th, but individual pilots have yet to get notifications. Once that comes, pilots have 10 days to contact the FAA for re-examination within 15 days of getting the letter, with some exception. White said the FAA listed 14 designated pilot examiners for planes in Alaska as of Monday, with Lee's name no longer being on the list. And separately, I saw that pilots on Reddit.com posted that the issue was that the nearest precision approach, which is of course required on the instrument check ride, was located over 50 miles away, and allegedly this approach had been skipped on some check rides. From ABCaudio.com, also from Alaska, Alaskans use vehicles to light up dark runway so medevac flight can land. Residents of a small Alaskan town use their vehicles to light up a dark runway to help a medevac plane land so it could transport a patient on Sunday. A light fixture at Deering Airport runway had been out of commission after gravel and ice damaged the system, according to the Alaska Department of Transportation. The broken lights forced workers at the Deering Clinic to contact community members to come up with a plan to help light the runway. Deering, Alaska residents use their ATVs and trucks to light up the runway, allowing the medevac plane to not only land, but also to take off once it picked up a patient at the Deering Clinic. It was very heartwarming, a community health aide at the Deering Clinic told ABC News. We all came together to make it possible, and then it was so cool when the medevac landed, the northern lights came out. Residents showed up with over 30 vehicles, according to Deering Clinic. The lights at the airport have been out since December 14th, but are once again operational. And this isn't the first time this has happened. In 2020, residents used vehicles to illuminate a dark runway then. From GeneralAviationNews.com, instructional flight ends when door flies off plane. This comes from a NASA ASRS report written by the flight instructor. It says, I had a scheduled lesson with my student. I supervised him as we went through his pre-flight duties on the Diamond DA-40. Upon starting the plane, I had him set up the G1000 and call for IFR clearance. During taxi and run-up, all indications were in the green, and the only PFD enunciation noted was the pitot heat off. On takeoff, all engine indications were in the green. I continued to monitor my student's airspeed and engine indications, which all looked normal. At 400 feet, he raised the flaps, pulled the prop back to 2,400 RPM. Shortly after contacting departure, I took control so he could put on his view-limiting device. I engaged the autopilot and set it to climb at 82 knots to an altitude of 6,000 feet and set the heading mode to 335. My student then said the door open indicator had come on. I asked him to take controls back so I could assess the situation. When I turned to look, the door latch was perpendicular to the door in the open position, and the safety latch was engaged. I attempted to push the door latch to parallel to lock the door closed. Upon closing the latch, the door disengaged and became removed from the airplane, all within seconds of closing the latch. At this point, I took controls back from my student and requested priority handling. We promptly turned back toward the airport and landed. And I just want to add that about a year and a half ago, I did research into Diamond DA-42 accidents. Now, this story was about the Diamond DA-40, though they have essentially the same rear door. And I came up with more than 15 similar incidents in which the rear door came off of the airplane. So this is an issue you really want to be careful of in DA-40s and DA-42s. Make sure that that rear door is latched shut. And at least in the case of the DA-42, the POH that I'm looking at right now says that if the door comes open, warning, do not try to lock the rear passenger door in flight. The safety latch may disengage and the door opens. Usually this results in a separation of the door from the airplane. Note, if the door has been lost, the airplane can be safely flown to the next suitable airfield. From AINonline.com, groupthink downs Twin Otter. In November 2021, a Canadian-registered de Havilland Twin Otter, operating as a scheduled flight, ran out of fuel and was forced to make an off-airport landing. The final accident report was just released and did not identify any mechanical issues with the aircraft. The pilot simply failed to check the fuel quantity prior to takeoff. During the crash, the Twin Otter was substantially damaged. The 2 pilots and 3 passengers survived the crash and were rescued 4 hours later. Each was treated for minor hypothermia. The Transportation Safety Board, or TSB of Canada, through its analysis, determined several causes and contributing factors to the accident. The most interesting findings relate to human factors and the development of adaptations when using checklists and how group dynamics can negatively influence flight safety. For this flight, the operator normally planned to fuel the aircraft for a round trip plus the required reserves. In this case, a total of 2,500 pounds of fuel was required. Commercial operators normally have checks and balances to assure that each flight departs with sufficient fuel in the tanks. At this airline, the flight crew would normally request fuel through the company's flight coordinator, who would then plan the fuel load with the fueling vendors. On the day of the crash, the pilots likely did not make a request to refuel the aircraft with the flight coordinator. During pre-flight, as the captain entered the aircraft, he observed a fuel receipt in the door map pocket of the aircraft, which reinforced his belief that the aircraft had been fueled. He did not read the fuel receipt. It was from a flight 3 days before the accident. The last line of defense to ensure that there is sufficient fuel on board are cockpit checklist items that compare the fuel versus the actual fuel on board the aircraft before departure and during flight. In this case, there were at least 3 opportunities to cross-check the fuel on board. During the before-start checklist, the proper response from the captain should have been fuel quantity checked 2,500 pounds. Instead, the captain performed the checklist from memory, and the fuel check was missed due to an interruption. Next, during the taxi checklist, a challenge and response checklist, the first officer should have announced fuel system, and the appropriate response from the captain would confirm the proper status of the fuel system. Normal, tips on or off, no lights, and restate the fuel quantity on board. Again, the captain performed the checklist from memory without any involvement from the first officer, so no challenge or response. At this point, there was less than 600 pounds of fuel aboard, nearly 2,000 pounds less than the planned amount. Once level in cruise, the pilot monitoring, the first officer in this case, was required to complete the cruise checklist and should have read fuel and confirmed fuel system status as normal tips on, and the quantity of fuel remaining at the destination, landing with XX pounds of fuel. Instead, the first officer completed the cruise checklist silently without any reference to a checklist. As a result, the low fuel state of the aircraft was never identified. The cruise checklist was the last opportunity for the flight crew to note the actual fuel on board, analyze the amount of fuel required to complete the flight, and provide an assessment of fuel remaining upon landing at the destination. According to the accident report, the low fuel level caution light for the aft fuel tank illuminated 26 minutes after takeoff, and the crew did not notice it. And at that point, there was just 402 pounds of fuel on board, which is about 40 minutes of flight at cruise power settings. Approximately 13 minutes later, the crew noticed the low fuel caution light and realized they had departed with insufficient fuel. At this point, the aircraft was level at 6,500 feet and roughly halfway between Yellowknife and Fort Simpson, with not enough fuel to continue to the destination or return to the departure point. Almost immediately, the flight crew began a diversion to Fort Providence Aerodrome, which had closest available runway. To conserve fuel, the captain climbed to 7,000 feet and reduced power. In a further attempt to conserve fuel, the captain intentionally shut down the left engine. Power was then reduced on the right engine, and the pilot began a slow descent. Approximately 9 minutes later, and 11 miles from the airport, while descending through 3,300 feet, the right engine began to surge due to fuel exhaustion. The flight crew elected to shut down the remaining engine, feather the prop, and establish best glide airspeed. 4 minutes later, the aircraft touched down on the Muskeg, which is a bog or peatland, 6.7 north miles west of the airport. And in their analysis, the TSB cautions that to be effective, the operating culture and CRM, or cockpit resource management, must encourage and maintain the practice of using checklists routinely. The improper use or not use using a checklist is frequently cited as a causal or contributing factor to an accident. During this investigation, the TSB found that a few experienced Twin Otter captains at the airline had developed the unsafe practice of performing the checklist silently or by memory only. According to the report, several first officers suggested that this had become the routine for those captains. A few junior first officers, including the accident first officer, noted that these captains would often perform checklists silently or by memory only without input from other crew members. The first officers would passively accommodate this practice without objection or filing any safety reports. Thus, there were no negative repercussions for the non-compliant captains, and the company had no awareness of the issue. The report noted that a group of first officers who disagreed with this practice would often discuss it amongst themselves or confide with some of their training captains. For this group of captains, the practice of not using checklists properly became the new norm, although the TSB report said they would be compliant during check rides. This practice affected the rest of the pilot group. The TSB noted individuals are often unaware of how or when they have been influenced by other people. As a result, they may end up making decisions or changing their behavior in a way they would not normally choose to. It continued, whether someone is influenced by another individual or group of individuals depends on many factors such as experience, seniority, personality, social status, or motivation. From GeneralAviationNews.com, thrown off by gusty winds, beach pilot forgets to extend landing gear. This comes from an NTSB report. The article says, the pilot of the Twin Beach 95-B55 was landing in gusty wind conditions at the airport in Westfield, Massachusetts, and thought he had extended the landing gear. As he began to flare, he felt a bump and attributed it to the wind. He then pitched the nose of the airplane up and quickly put his hand on the landing gear lever to confirm the landing gear was down. The airplane began to roll to the right, so he returned his hand to the throttles to reduce power on the right engine. The plane hit the ground on the left wing and nose. The belly then hit the ground, and the airplane slid upright before coming to a stop, resulting in substantial damage to the left wing and fuselage. Airport surveillance video captured the plane as it began to flare over the runway with the landing gear retracted. The airplane then pitched up, and the landing gear was observed extending while the plane was just a few feet above the runway. The left wing then dropped and hit the ground, followed by the nose and fuselage. The pilot said he normally announces the pre-landing checklist out loud, but did not do it on this flight. Due to gusty wind conditions, he landed with partial flaps, higher airspeed, and power setting. As a result, this configuration did not trigger the landing gear warning horn. Probable cause: the pilot's failure to maintain control of the airplane during the landing, and his failure to confirm that the landing gear was extended before landing. From GeneralAviationNews.com, Mooney pilot hits mowing equipment after unstable approach. This also is from an NTSB report. The pilot reported that during the first landing attempt at the airport in Holly Ridge, North Carolina, the Mooney M20TN was too fast, so he performed a go-around. During his second attempt, he descended and touched down on the runway. However, he overshot his intended landing spot. He added that he did not believe a safe go-around could be performed after the touchdown, so he decided to continue the landing roll and applied max braking. However, the airplane overran the end of the runway and hit mower equipment located to the right of the runway. The left wing sustained substantial damage. Probable cause: the pilot's failure to perform a go-around during an unstable approach to land, which resulted in a landing area overshoot and a subsequent runway excursion. And this reminds me of another mower accident that occurred in our area sometime in the last 5 to 10 years at the Fraser Lake Airport, which has a grass runway. The pilot landed long and unfortunately killed the person who was operating the lawnmower at the far end of the runway. And also from GeneralAviationNews.com, distracted student pilot bends Cessna 150. This also is from an NTSB report. The student pilot was performing touch and goes at the airport in Peyton, Colorado. During the landing roll, he intended to retract the flaps, but accidentally extended the flaps further. While correcting the flap setting, he transferred his attention inside the cockpit, and the Cessna 150 veered to the left. He pulled the throttle back before the airplane departed the side of the runway. The airplane's nose wheel collapsed, and the airplane came to rest in the grass, resulting in substantial damage to the fuselage. An examination of the airplane did not reveal any flight control anomalies. Probable cause: the student pilot did not maintain directional control of the airplane while landing. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's diverted attention to the incorrect flap setting. And finally, from westernmassnews.com, rescuers use kayaks to reach pilot after crash in icy creek. Rescuers used kayaks to reach the pilot of a small airplane that crashed into an icy creek near a Maryland airport and began to sink, state police said. Witnesses told police that moments after the Piper Cherokee took off from Lee Airport in Edgewater, they heard it sputter and crash into Beards Creek, Maryland State Police said in a news release. A county police officer who heard the call and two people nearby jumped into action using kayaks on the frozen creek. John Galeen Sr., a retired naval officer, and his son, John Jr., a Marine, grabbed kayaks and used shovels to skim across the ice to the pilot, who authorities identified as Steve Couchman. Couchman, 71, of Prince Frederick, was standing on the wing as the plane sank and stayed afloat by hanging onto a kayak. He was very calm, Galeen said. I think hypothermia might have been starting to come in. Department of Natural Resources police arrived on a boat, cut through the ice, and pulled Couchman to safety. He was then taken to a hospital where he was treated for injuries from the crash. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of my updates, and later we'll talk about a fatal accident. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's go to the good news. First, congratulations to Russ Irwin, who just passed his multi-engine rating. And he also has a Diamond DA62 on order. And we're going to be getting together in February to do some more practice in our club's DA42 prior to his aircraft arriving. So, Russ, congratulations. Also, congratulations to Jim Mullane. He passed his instrument rating and is now studying for the commercial. And he sent a picture of the setup that he used during the oral portion of the instrument check ride. He says the DPE was very impressed with my use of a projector and laser pointer. Well, very impressive indeed, Jim. Congratulations. And Mega supporter Rick Miller reports that he's just become the chief flight instructor for the Lunken Flight Training Center at the Lunken Airport in Cincinnati. They provide Part 141 and Part 61 instrument commercial training, as well as CFI and CFII training in their 172s, DA-20, and Diamond DA-40 aircraft. He says we have 120 students, 11 airplanes, and 15 instructors. He says your Aviation News Talk podcast content continues to be amazing. You provide an enormous wealth of information. We encourage all of our students to listen to both yours and Carl Villari's Aviation Careers podcast. Of course, we've had Carl on the show, and if you're interested in going to the airlines, you definitely want to listen to his podcast. Anyway, the website, if you're in the Cincinnati area, is flylftc.com. And here's an email from Rami here in California. He says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Lately, I've been having trouble starting an older Cessna 182 G1000. I followed the POH to the letter of priming with quarter-inch throttle, even tried with throttle halfway, until the fuel flow needle stabilizes, and then turn the ignition key. I use the cycle of no more than 10 seconds ignition, then cool down 20 seconds. I tried this 3 times and then wait 10 minutes before trying again one last time before I give up, as I don't want to damage the starter or run down the battery. On the first attempt, I can hear the engine just barely about to catch, but never happens. I don't smell any gas, and there's no engine coughing, popping, so I don't think I'm over-priming. Am I maybe under-priming because of cold temperatures? Well, Rami, here's something about starting airplanes in cold weather that just doesn't get discussed very much. When the outside temperatures are cold, it takes fuel longer to atomize, and it's the vapors that catch fire, not the liquid. So when it's cold outside, I usually wait 20, maybe 30 seconds after I prime before I turn the key. Now that gives the fuel more time to atomize, and the airplane almost always starts when I do that. And if you didn't hear last week's episode with Dr. Victor Vogel about aging and how it affects pilots, you want to go back and listen to it. It's episode 257. One thing he said is that the mind is like a muscle. We have to use it by learning new things. And that inspired me to decide to start studying for another aviation certificate. And already just in the last few days, I've had so much fun doing some studying online. And I'll tell you more about that in the months ahead. But let me ask you, what are your aviation goals for 2023? Do you want to get any new certificates or ratings or type ratings or other activities that you're planning in 2023 to keep your brain engaged and learning new things? Well, if so, drop me a line, let me know, and I'll share some of those emails in the future. And speaking of 2023, if you've ever thought that you'd like to develop a side hustle or even a full-blown business that leverages your passion for aviation, you might be interested in a podcast episode I listened to on the way back from the airport today. It's the Aviation Marketing Hangar Flying podcast produced by Paula and John Williams. Now, they have a business which you can find at aviationbusinessconsultants.com, which provides business and marketing consulting for aviation firms. And this week, they are replaying what they said was their most popular podcast episode of 2022, which was called Startups and Side Hustles, where they pass along ideas on how to earn money in the aviation industry while perhaps still keeping your day job. And of course, I'll include a link to that episode in our show notes. Also, a few days ago, I learned something interesting about cowl plugs that I never knew before. Now, these are pretty mundane devices. Of course, they're just something that you put in the holes in the front of the airplane to keep birds' nests and other things like that from being formed inside the engine. So you'd think, well, what's special about these? Now, I had climbed out of a Cirrus, and as I was walking away, I looked back at the plane and I thought, wow, she's smiling at me. So I took a photo and posted it on Facebook. And this week when I post the show notes for Patreon supporters, I'll post the photo there as well. In the photo, 2 red round cowl plugs look like the eyes. The spinner looks like a nose. The strap hanging down below the cowl plugs looks like a smile. And the flag on the strap looks like a tongue or maybe even a cigar sticking out of the mouth. But a couple of people commented that there was a better way to arrange the strap, which I hadn't heard before. The problem, of course, with cowl plugs is that you might forget to pull them during the pre-flight, and you could toast the engine if you leave them in when you take off. Now, if you think that doesn't happen, one of my clients in just the past year destroyed his cowl plugs, though not the engine, when he started the plane and the propeller ripped them out. What 2 commenters on the photo told me was that you should always loop the strap over the top blade so that the strap passes in front of the blade. That way, if you start the plane with the cowl plugs in, the blade will pull the plugs out of the airplane and you won't risk toasting your engine. Clever tip that I'd never heard before, and now you know as well. And here's a fun conversation I overheard between the tower controller at Palo Alto, California, with 2 helicopter pilots. For about the past 2 months, there have been 2 helicopters working daily, perhaps a mile from the airport, replacing power line towers and other components at a power substation. They've been operating directly under the departure path of our main runway, and the tower's constantly been giving the helicopters instructions and departing pilots instructions to keep us all separated from each other. Now, my thanks to liveatc.com for the audio. The original audio ran longer, but I cut out the audio of several other aircraft, so you'll hear just the helicopters and the controller.
Palo Alto Tower, helicopter 174, complete.
Helicopter 4, Echo Mike, Palo Alto Tower.
Yes, ma'am, I'm about to lift in a couple minutes from the LZ and was wondering if I could get a squawk code for a very short transition to SFO.
Affirmative, you're bell 207?
That was close cell 429/Skull.
Helicopter 4, Echo Mike, Eastman Squawk 5347, just advise when you listen.
5347, I'll call you as soon as we left. Helicopter 4, Echo Mike.
Palo Alto Tower, Copter 611 Alpha Charlie, lifting out of the substation. I'd like to depart northeast, and I think you're finally rid of it.
Or so you're finally done?
Well, let's not jinx it, but I think we might be.
Helicopter 1 Alpha Charlie, Roger. You can cross as the extended further line north to eastbound, Paul Altimeter 3022.
All right, crossing the center line, and thank you so much for your help. I know it was a hassle, but we appreciate it.
Yes, Palo Alto Tower, helicopter 174, Echo Mike is ready for that west-northwest departure of the LZ.
Helicopter 4, Echo Mike, that's approved as requested, Paul Altimeter 3022.
On the go, helicopter 4, Echo Mike, and ditto that. Thanks to manager and you guys for keeping us all on the safe the last 2 months.
Helicopter 4, Echo Mike, in contact San Carlos on 119 airplane 0, safe right.
To the San Carlos, good day for Echo Mike.
Helicopter 1 Alpha Charlie, frequency is change is approved. If you want to ever make it up to us, you can always come up and bring us some donuts.
Donuts? You like green-filled or jelly?
Oh, jelly.
All right, noted.
So just remember, if you're headed up to the tower, they prefer jelly donuts. And I wanted to let you know that the FAA has a new aeronautical chart guide available. It's free. It's available online. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. And the value of this is that in the olden days, 15, 20 years ago, when we used to use paper charts, it was often very easy to find the legends for the different charts we were using because they were printed right there on the edge of the chart. Now that we have electronic charts, sometimes these legends are a little bit more difficult to find, so you might want to go ahead and download a copy of this guide and have it with you in the airplane. That way, if you ever have a question about a symbol, you can look it up. And here's another note from Rami here in California, who wrote that he had passed his instrument rating knowledge exam. And I said to him when I replied, since you've just taken the exam, you might consider taking the instrument ground instructor exam now too. Then all you have to do is take the FOI, the Fundamentals of Instruction exam, and you will be an instrument ground instructor. And if you take the AGI, the Advanced Ground Instructor exam, then you'll also be a ground instructor for anything airplane related. And I said it's a nice stepping stone to becoming a CFI, and it's exactly the route that I took. With my IGI, or Instrument Ground Instructor, I started an instrument ground school that I gave, probably 4 or 5 times at the Reed Hillview Airport over 20 years ago before I became a CFI. Now, he wrote back that he was thinking about retaking the exam to get a somewhat higher score, and he said, now I think I'll consider doing the Instrument Ground Instructor exam instead. And I wrote back, that's great. It's a better use of your time and money. You also want to get the FOI exam. The best way to prepare for that is the FAA's Aviation Instructor's Handbook, which you can download for free. And of course, I will include a link to that in our show notes. Now, to get the Instrument Ground Instructor certificate from the FAA, you just need to schedule an appointment with any FAA FSDO and then show them the test result sheets for the IGI and FOI exams. And of course, if you've also taken the AGI exam, then you also get the Advanced Ground Instructor certificate from the FSDO, and that allows you to teach ground to student pilots. And by the way, I'm always happy to send clients to the ground instructors because I prefer to teach the flying rather than give all the ground instruction that's required to become a pilot or an instrument pilot and so on. So anyway, I encourage all of you out there to consider getting your ground instructor certificates if you have any thoughts about eventually becoming a CFI. And hey, this might actually be a good little side hustle that we were just talking about. And here's an email from new patron supporter Jake Glenn. He says, hey Max, I just got done with my first flight as a CFI and right away had to employ some lessons learned from the show. After an uneventful run-up and takeoff, we noticed that our voices were becoming increasingly garbled over the intercom. I instantly thought of a story on the show a few weeks back, can't remember the exact episode, about how garbled intercom could be a pretty good indication of electrical problems. So I glanced down and sure enough, our load meter was pegged at 0. Shortly thereafter, we lost all electrical power. We were able to circle back, pick up light gun signals from the tower, and land safely. Also, my support for the show is long overdue, and I'm very happy to be able to pass on these experiences to my fellow aviators. Thanks for all you do to keep the GA community safe and informed. Keep up the good work. And my thanks to Jake for taking the couple minutes that it takes to sign up to support the show. And here are some of the other generous people who have taken just a couple minutes of their time to support the show. Special thanks to Jim Brosfield. He's one of our new mega supporters. These are the people that sign up to support the show at $50 a month, and we'll tell you more about Jim in a future episode. Other new Patreon supporters besides Jake Glenn include Don Lundell at the $8 a month level, Michael Winkler, $8 a month, Kat Embry, $20 a month, Tim Nealon, $35 a month, and Sean Brown also at $35, so they'll get access to my online courses. Tom Freeman added his pledge up to $8 a month. Rob Parisian and Drew Henry are both at the $20 a month level, so they'll get access to the many videos that I've posted. We also had some one-time donations via PayPal, including John Griffin and Joel Garris, who each gave $50. And you know, typically only about 3 to 4% of listeners support podcasts, so can't tell you how much I appreciate that these people and the many others have taken time out of their day to take just a couple minutes to sign up and support the show, and I hope you'll consider doing the same. And thanks to everybody who contributes to the show in whatever way that you do. Now, usually when pilots learn and talk about fatal accidents, it's in the abstract. It's something that's happened to someone else who we don't know, and we just read or hear a summary of what happened. But we rarely hear what the pilot was thinking or why they made decisions that led to the accident. And candidly, when we hear about accidents, many of us as pilots think, oh, that kind of thing only happens to other pilots. It will never happen to me. Have you ever heard yourself think that? I certainly thought that many times in my first decade of flying. But over time, some of the things I thought could only happen to other pilots have happened to me. And I now realize that none of us is special. We don't have immunity from bad things happening when we fly. The best we can do is train often and to try to learn from other pilots so we can hopefully avoid having an accident or incident ourselves. Now, as you listen to this story, see if you hear any red flags along the way that might give just a hint of possible trouble. At the end, I'll talk about what I heard and about my experiences. And finally, I want to thank Arturo for having the courage to tell his story. Also, he was remarkably composed throughout our conversation given the topic. But if you're easily disturbed by discussions of physical injuries, well, you may want to stop listening now or stop listening after Arturo talks about the aircraft hitting the ground. And now let me tell you a little about Arturo Guerra. He started flying over 20 years ago. He worked in technology and flew aircraft on the side for fun. He's the creator of the FlashPass app that U.S. pilots can use when flying internationally to and from the U.S. to interact with EAPIS, the Electronic Advanced Passenger Information System, that pilots have to use to send a manifest to U.S. Customs and Border Protection at least 60 minutes prior to departure. Arturo is also one of our mega supporters of Aviation News Talk, which is how I came to know him and hear his story. And now here's our conversation with Arturo Guerra. Arturo, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Max. It's an honor. Happy to be here.
Well, I know these are tough things to talk about, so thanks so much for being interested in talking. Tell us first, what are you hoping will come out of this conversation? How are you hoping that this will help other people?
Well, Max, to be honest, I've been grappling with this question since you brought it up, and it's been hard, but I have three things that I think that's the reason that I'm doing this. The first is I wish my son, Arturo Jr., to be remembered. He was a bright, talented young boy that excelled in everything he did. And in a way, talking about him in this aviation forum is a way of honoring his life. So that's first and foremost. A second idea is, aviation has become safer because of accidents, mistakes. So I hope that by sharing my story, some other pilot might benefit or avoid a similar situation, and it would help him in some way. And number three, and this is also important for me, I've learned in these past years since my accident that people grieve in different ways. And for me, I have found that talking about what happened helps me cope with my new reality. And I hope I can learn to live without my son. And it's just a learning process. Everybody says that you're going to cope this way or that way, but I found that I'm very unique. Basically, those are the three reasons that I think why I'm here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. First, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do for a living? And then tell us about your flying experience.
Max, well, I'm a Mexican citizen, born and raised in Monterrey, Mexico. It's north of Mexico, about 100 nautical miles south of Laredo, Texas, or McAllen. It's west of McAllen, Texas. I was born 1964. You do the math. I'm not going to do it for you guys. I studied in the American School Foundation of Monterrey most of my life. My father studied in UT Austin for a couple of years, and that's where I got my English. Then I graduated computer systems engineering in Monterrey Tech. And I always loved aviation. Back when my father brought model airplanes for me on Christmas and birthdays. I remember those airplanes that you were holding with some lines and you were spinning around all day long. Then I graduated to RC models. And after that, I started flying Quicksilver aircraft, those home builds, some tubes, a little chair, and you're up there flying like crazy maniac. After that, I graduated to general aviation planes. I got my private pilot license in Mexico, and I purchased a small Cessna 150, which I enjoyed a lot. I learned more of the regulations and ways to fly in the States in that little aircraft. And then I changed that aircraft to a Cessna 172. Then I got a Cessna 210. Then I started with tail draggers, got a Husky in Phoenix, Arizona. I brought it to Mexico, and then I purchased a Cessna 206, which I own currently. It's a great aircraft, air conditioning, G1000. It makes you very spoiled very fast. And after that, I purchased this small Carbon Cub, and it's the one in which I had the accident back in November 25th, 2001. So a little more than a year ago.
So how many years total have you been flying, and roughly how many hours do you have, and what certificates and ratings do you have?
Okay, so I started my flying back in when I was 30 years old, or a little bit before that. So now I'm 58. So it's more than 20 years. I got my private pilot in Mexico, in Monterrey, Mexico, in my local airport. Then I got my IFR rating also in Monterrey. My private was in 2000, around the 2000. Ever since then, and counting my ultralight time. Oh, I forgot to mention, I fly also gliders. We have a gliding club here in Monterrey. We do a lot of gliding, lots of fun. And I would say that in total, I would have about 2,500 hours, give or take.
And I know you recently passed your instrument rating. When did you do that, and where did you do that, and what kind of aircraft did you do it in?
I did the training here in Monterrey online, and I got 100%, so I was extremely proud of myself. Then I went to McAllen, Texas, to do the actual training, and an instructor came down from California to McAllen, and we flew for about 10 days. Then I got my check ride in the Houston area, which was extremely difficult with all those controllers speaking super fast and with a lot of traffic. I was very surprised that I got my IFR rating on the first try, and I just got it about 2 weeks ago, Max.
Wow, congratulations. That's great.
And Max, you were a lot of help with, I was texting you questions, and your book was really helpful. I love that you signed it for me, and my instructor took it by mistake back to California, so I'm hoping that I get it back anytime soon. But it was a great help. Thanks for that.
Of course, happy to help. Well, tell us a little bit about your son. How did he get interested in flying, and talk about his ratings and his pilot experience and how many hours he had and so on.
So my son Arturo was born in 1994, and he studied in Mexico in the same school I did, Monterrey. It's called American School Foundation of Monterrey. And in high school, we decided to send him to a military academy in Wisconsin. It's a great school. And when we first arrived there, we found out that they had an aviation program. So, I mean, we had a plane, so he immediately jumped at the opportunity to join the program. And funny story, when he wanted to enroll to the aviation program, the lady who was taking the cadets for that program said that he couldn't. And he came to me and she said, "Well, Dad, they're not accepting me." And I said, "Oh, why not?" So he said, "Well, the lady says that only U.S. citizens will be able to join the program." So I said, "This is not correct." So I went and talked to her, and she told me that the cadets were eventually going to fly by themselves in a real airplane, and that it was very important that the communication skills were there, like the language. And I told her, "Well, why don't you go with my son for a few minutes and talk to him? I mean, and if you feel that he's not up to the level that you guys need for aviation, I mean, I'll be happy to withdraw his request." And she did. So she came out and she said, "Well, he speaks perfect English, so he was approved for the program." And he loved it very much. He was the first cadet that got his written. He was the first one to fly solo. I mean, he loved it. And it was difficult because they had to do it after school, and they had to take a ride to the airport. And after all day studying, he had to continue the aviation part. And I mean, it's not easy, but he excelled at it, and he was very, very happy with it. And at the end of the semester, only 2 students got the actual pilot's license, and it was him and another boy from the academy. And so I'm sorry, I get a little bit emotional. I was so proud. One of the proudest days of my life. So that's Arturo Jr.
And had he flown with you together prior to going to the academy? Did he have, some flying experience prior to the academy?
Very little, very little. He flew with me a lot, but not flying the plane. I mean, he maybe got the controls a little bit, but really flying was in the flight academy.
Mm-hmm. And he also got his instrument rating, and he got that before you did. Is that right?
Yeah, he got it about 5 years before I did, and I tried to enroll him in the accelerated program, but he had so little hours that the instructor said, "Well, he's very confident. He's very good at flying, but he doesn't have the hours." So we cut the training short, came back home, and we started flying more. And eventually we came back and got the accelerated training again. And he got the rating in Burnett, Texas, a few years later. And I was very, very proud because that training, I mean, now that I have the IFR rating, I know how much he liked it, because if you don't like it, it's no way you can do it. And he was very proficient. He was a very good pilot.
It's definitely a real challenge and a lot of mental work to do instrument training. How many hours total did he have of flight experience?
I would say, Max, that he would have been about 250 to 300 hours. That's a rough estimate.
Sure.
But he also flew gliders with me. We flew the tail dragger. We flew the Cessna. I mean, we tried to squeeze in as much time together as we could.
Well, talk a little bit about the day of the accident. How did that start out, and what was your plan for the day?
So, Max, we had a trip planned for Arturo Jr. to get some tail wheel training, and we wanted to get him his tail dragger endorsement. So we went to Burnett, Texas, where he got his IFR. So we scheduled 3 days for training up there. And on the last day, we came back home, and that was when the accident happened. We were flying back home, approaching Monterrey.
And how did that flight start out, and how did the weather change as the flight evolved?
Yeah, so we took off from the Austin area, and it was completely BFR. I mean, we had a very strong tailwind. There was a strong wind coming in from the north, so we were flying the Cub like at Cessna 206 speeds, and we were very happy because of the speed. And I was flying in the front seat for that leg. And we were hoping to make Nuevo Laredo, which is in Mexico, for the customs procedure to come back into Mexico. And we were waiting there in Nuevo Laredo for the customs procedure. And I asked him, "Arturo, do you want to change seats? Do you want to fly the return part of the trip back home in the front?" And he said, "Yeah, of course, I'll do that." And we took off from Nuevo Laredo to Monterrey. And the day was completely BFR. The only condition was that there was a strong tailwind. I would say that about 30 knots, which was giving us super nice speed, ground speed. And that's when we got into trouble on the return trip.
So tell us what happened next.
So, Max, when you arrive from Laredo to Monterrey, there's a little bit of a hilly terrain, not big mountains, but like hilly terrain. And right on those little hills that were near the Monterrey entrance, there was a space between the little hills and the cloud cover. There was I would say that there was about a gap of 1,000 feet from the little hills to the actual cloud layer. Mm-hmm. And we tried to squeeze in between those little mountains and the layer. And it's something that we agreed, both of us agreed on it. It was not his decision or mine. We thought that was like a safe thing to do. And when we got into that hilly area, the wind it was like a hurricane. I mean, it was bouncing the plane all over the place. It was practically uncontrollable. It took the plane all the way to the left. We almost hit like a hill. So Arturo corrected to the right, and we were, getting really, really hammered by the winds because of the rotors and all. And to be honest, with my experience, I should have seen it. The Carbon Cub flies so slow and it's so simple to fly that it gives you a sense of security. We didn't think anything about it up until the moment that we were in trouble. So Arturo was like, whoa, what's happening? And I told him, Arturo, climb. We're going to get blasted into a mountainside, so into the hill. So he climbed. And immediately when he climbed, we got into the cloud layer. And I told him, Arturo, remember your instrument, look at your panel, maintain a heading. And all of a sudden I said, well, what am I doing? I'm backseat driving. Arturo is IFR rated. He should be able to control it. So I said, I'm going to shut up and let him do the work. So I got my cell phone. I just grabbed the seat because he was in front of me. And the visibility in the back seat is very limited. If I looked at the front, I could only see his back and the back of his head. And to the sides, you have two little areas where you can see a little bit to the sides. So I was just looking whatever I could see. But I was trying to leave him to do his job. And when I was looking at the window to one of my sides, I started looking at the ground, and all of a sudden I saw blue sky or clouds, and then ground again, and then sky again. And I said, wow, we're tumbling to the ground. And after that, I don't remember anything. We impacted the ground super, super hard. I blacked out. I hit my head in the back of his seat, and my right leg snapped in two below the knee. I had an exposed fracture. It even tore the jeans, and the bone was sticking out. So when I came to myself, and I didn't know where I was looking at ground or like dirt. So I pushed myself up, and I fell on my back, and I was outside the aircraft looking up, and there was a lot of wind. It was extremely cold. I don't know, but I believe I was out for like 30 minutes, and I was shivering. So immediately I start looking for my son, and I'm shouting for him to answer me, but I couldn't see him. He was buried inside the aircraft. And basically that was the accident itself.
And did the aircraft hit something, or was it just simply a loss of control?
Yeah, I didn't know at the time, Max, but when I got rescued and when I was out of the hospital, a good friend of mine told me what had happened. And it seems that when we got into the clouds, the winds were just taking us all over the place, and they took us to a radio tower. And it was not those flimsy towers that it's like one pole. It was like a good solid tower. And we hit the tower with one of our wings, and it completely sheared the wing off the plane. And we spiraled into the ground. I would have to guess about 50 or 60 feet. And we came down inverted right into the ground. And actually, part of the wing was still inside the tower. It stayed there somewhere, somehow.
And after the accident, what did you do to save yourself?
Well, Max, first of all, I wear glasses, as you can see. And when my head impacted the front seat, my glasses exploded. And this part of my face had about 14 fractures all around the eye. And my nose also was broken, so I couldn't see. This eye was completely closed. And fortunately, when I was fumbling around and trying to figure out what happened, I stumbled into my phone. This phone, I still have it. And because I didn't have my glasses and one eye was shut, I couldn't see if my phone was right side up or this side, so I had to fumble and find what was the front. And when I touched it to turn it on, I couldn't see anything. So I said, Siri, and Siri answered. So I was able to call my wife, and I had signal, and that's when the rescue started.
Tell us a little bit about the rescue.
Well, Max, once I got in touch with my wife, she got in touch with a good friend who has a helicopter, and he sent that helicopter to find me. I was able to send my coordinates on the cell phone, and the chopper was able to point to the ground crews where I was, and they got there fairly fast. I mean, it was about 2 hours from the moment we impacted to the rescue. And in those 2 hours, I got in some kind of survival mode. I had my little routine that I was calling for my son, see if he was maybe unconscious, maybe he would wake up. And then I was looking at myself. I tried to touch all my body, see if I had any other broken bones. All my feet. I knew that I had a compound fracture on my right leg, so I took off my belt and I made a tourniquet because I was bleeding a lot from my lower leg. And I remember that training from back when I was in grade school. And they told me that you had to put the tourniquet very tight and to loosen it up every 10, 15 minutes to let the blood flow a little bit. And but anyway, about 2 hours, a good friend of mine came just walking. I mean, he was walking in the bush, and he had the coordinates who he arrived. His name is Leopoldo Gonzalez. I think he saved my life. I was shivering. I was very cold. And the first thing he did was he passed me his jacket, and that made it much, much better. And about 20 minutes after that, the paramedics came in, and but they came just walking. I said, "Hey, do you have any rescue equipment with you?" Or he said, "No, I have his radio." Okay, so get on the radio and ask for this. And I started barking orders, and I got into like survival mode. I don't know. So I asked them to get a stretcher. So they brought a stretcher. And I asked him also for some kind of a brace for my leg. And he brought it along, and I had to instruct them on how to use it because they just wanted to put my leg and throw it in there and say, hold on. I mean, look at the bone. We have to take care of it. So I was, you come here, you grab this, you grab that. I'm going to count to 3. You're going to lift the leg, you put it in. And I was like coordinating everybody. My wife thinks I'm a little bit bossy, maybe. That helped during the rescue. And then more people came in, and they strapped me into the stretcher, and they had me pull me out by hand. And then there was a good, 700 meters, and it was a hike. So then they got me into the ambulance, and they took me down the hill all the way to the hospital. And all the time that we were going to the hospital, I was with my phone looking at Google Maps and guiding the guy because he didn't know where the hospital was. So, and during the ride, I called my insurance company, and I called my insurance guy, and I told him, "Hey, dude, go to the hospital. I need you. So make the paperwork, whatever paperwork you need, take care of it because I don't want to be asked my name or anything. You just, when I get there, I just want to go in." And so he took care of everything. And I have another friend who's also a doctor, and he assembled this team prior to my arrival. And I already sent him pictures of all the things that were wrong with me. So they had a little bit of a picture of what to expect. So that helped a lot. I mean, if I would have been unconscious for so long after the accident, maybe I wouldn't be here because there was no way they wouldn't find me.
That's amazing. I've never heard of anybody managing their own rescue quite that way.
Well, come down to Mexico. Maybe you... Yeah, I mean, the guys that helped me, Max, were outstanding guys, but they don't have the training that maybe in other countries they do. But they had the will to do it, the strength, and I just had to guide them a little bit of what to do and how to do it. Because, I mean, again, I'm a little bit bossy, maybe.
Well, that certainly worked to your advantage that day. I'm wondering, were there any external factors, any stress or pressure to complete the flight that day?
Well, Max, to be honest, it was a very standard flight. I mean, there was no pressure to get there. I think that it was just complacency. The airplane is so simple to fly. I mean, we've been flying it for so long, and it was so easy. We got into trouble by ourselves. I mean, nobody to blame but us. I mean, there was no need for that.
Tell us about the past year since the accident. What kinds of things have you been going through, and how have you been taking care of yourself in that time?
Well, Max, the accident was on 25 November 2021, and I was in the hospital for between 20 and 30 days. When you have an exposed, it's called a compound fracture, and it gets dirty because, I mean, of the elements. The most important thing that doctors have to take care of is the infection. So they had to clean it a lot, inject a lot of antibiotics. So the leg was a big deal. And also the fractures on the face were important. They didn't want me to lose the eye. So I had very, very good care. So I was in the hospital for a good 20, 25 days. And after I came home, I was in a wheelchair for some time. And that's when the real work started. There was some rehab going on. But physically, Max, I knew I was going to be all right. The physical part, I didn't really care too much. The most important thing that I was concerned about it was my son, that I had lost my buddy, my partner, my friend. And that was the toughest thing, the biggest wound that I had. It was very difficult to sleep at night. The accident came back every night, and it still does. And I relive it almost every night. And a strange thing, I mean, being a pilot, being an engineer, I try to, this happens mostly at night when I go to bed, and the demons can come back. And I'm trying to in some way to try to do different things. I mean, to turn away, to land, I should have stayed in the radio. I don't know. There's a million things that I've been thinking every night of what I should have done. I mean, something as simple as just climbing and open an IFR flight plan. Something as simple as that. I don't know. It's very difficult. It's been very difficult. And I don't expect it to get easier anytime soon, Max. So I was ready to leave aviation altogether, but I decided that Arturo Jr. wouldn't want me to do that. And one day, maybe in February of this year, I just said, well, if I'm going to do this, let me do this the right way. And I started working on my IFR rating in the US, which was very difficult. It was extremely difficult, but I think it was very good for my soul because I dedicated the license to my son. And right now I have to look for another challenge. And I don't know what the future is going to bring, but I'm going to be there to meet it.
Yeah, I can only imagine how tough that's been. Is there a particular message you'd like to communicate to other pilots? Any kind of conclusions you've come to after kind of replaying this accident in your mind so many times over the last year?
Well, there's many. First of all, have your cell phone charged and with you in your person. I mean, my phone saved my life. Practice the procedures, the emergency procedures in case something happens. I was unlucky enough to land in a place where there was nothing. I mean, there was no people around for maybe, 5-6 miles. And my injuries prevented me from moving more than a couple of feet in any direction. So planning for an accident really helps. I was lucky, but maybe have some water, have some way to communicate. That goes a long way. Just plan ahead and follow the rules. I mean, don't fly BFR if you can fly IFR and it will help you. So, I mean, my accident is not the first in this kind. I'm sure it's happens so much. So just follow the rules. If you are an IFR pilot, just fly IFR and get over it. I mean, get done with it. Even if you're in a small plane like this. So maybe those are the most important things that I would recommend my fellow pilots.
Thanks so much, Arturo. Any final thoughts you'd like to share before we conclude here?
Final thoughts, Max. I don't know. I mean, I would like to reach out to people who were in my same position and ask them what they did to make the pain go away a little bit, to maybe do things in a different way. I don't know. I mean, I would like some feedback from people who, I'm sure I'm not the only one in this position. I was lucky. I think I'm lucky to be alive. The accident was so bad you wouldn't believe. I mean, I'm lucky to be alive. So, I don't know, maybe if I could get some feedback of any tips that I could do. I'm trying my best. So, anything is welcome.
Arturo, thank you so much for talking with us today. I think it takes tremendous courage to do what you've done here. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks for inviting me, Max. I love your show, and you're the only person that I would have talked to about this. I mean, I can't think of anybody else, to be honest.
Thank you again. And my thanks again to Arturo for sharing his story. I knew this would be a difficult conversation, so he and I spent some time ahead of time figuring out how best to tell the story. If you'd like to send him feedback on how you've dealt with similar painful situations, you can email him at Arturo, Arturo, Guerra, Guerra, Perez, Perez, @gmail.com. Now let's talk about any hints you heard in the story of possible trouble ahead. At one point, Arturo said, and to be honest, I mean I should have seen it. I mean, the Carbon Cub flies so slow and it's so simple to fly that it gives you a sense of security. Here's the one little red flag I heard that I have missed multiple times in my flying career. He said, I mean, we had a very strong tailwind. There was a strong wind coming in from the north, so we were flying the Cub at like Cessna 206 speeds, and we were very happy because of the speed. And I think it's easy for any of us to get excited when we get a tailwind, because who doesn't want to fly faster? And when I get a really strong tailwind, I sometimes feel that I deserve that strong tailwind because of the hours we spend in headwinds. And if you're flying over flat terrain, such as in the Midwest, you can reap all of the benefits of a tailwind without having to pay many consequences, though it may make landing a little more difficult. But if you fly in hilly or mountainous terrain, you might pay a big price for that tailwind, and that's turbulence. Many years ago, long before I became a flight instructor, I flew a Cessna 182 from Palo Alto to South Lake Tahoe to meet some friends and go skiing for the day. The field elevation there is about 6,200 feet, and you need to climb to about 10,500 feet to cross the mountains to get to the airport. During the flight, I noted that I had a tailwind of about 40 to 50 knots, and I was absolutely ecstatic. The flight was uneventful until about the last 5 minutes when I had to descend to land at the airport. And that's when I was hit by severe turbulence for the first time ever. I had been to the Lake Tahoe region once before, and I didn't realize that strong winds, such as the really nice tailwind I had, are wonderful when you're flying over flat terrain, but over mountainous terrain, the wind gets violently disturbed and causes turbulence. According to the FAA, quote, severe turbulence causes large and abrupt changes in altitude and or attitude, and usually large variations in indicated speed. The airplane may momentarily be out of control. Occupants of the airplane will be forced violently against their seatbelts. And I can tell you it was extremely unpleasant. I don't think it was extreme turbulence, which is defined as the airplane is tossed violently about and is impossible to control. It may cause structural damage. In my case, it wasn't impossible to control the airplane, though it was difficult to control, and it was very unpleasant to be in the airplane. So the strong tailwind was one sign there could be turbulence in the mountains north of Monterrey. Options at that point might have been to do a U-turn and return to the departure airport, or perhaps to fly a longer route to the east to avoid the tallest mountains. But of course, it's much easier to analyze and evaluate events after they have happened rather than when you're in the middle of them. And hopefully our conversation today will help you identify and avoid any similar situations in the future. Again, my thanks to all of you who help support the show in whatever way that you do, whether it's through your emails and feedback, whether it's by telling friends about this show, or even leaving us a 5-star review on whichever podcast app that you're listening to us now. And of course, if you'd like to help support the show, go on out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome or aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.